The sprawling estate of Alexander Grant was a fortress of wealth, its tall iron gates and stone-pillared entrance standing as a reminder to the world that fortune and influence resided within. To the public eye, Alexander was a man who had everything, a powerful businessman, one of the wealthiest men in the city, and the owner of industries that touched every corner of the market. But behind the towering walls of his mansion and the polished smile he carried to business meetings lay a truth that stripped him of all pride. His young son, Daniel, hadn't spoken a word since birth. Doctors labeled it selective mutism, some said trauma, others said it was simply a condition that might fade with time. But time was cruel, and Daniel was now 8 years old, silent, withdrawn, and often looking at the world with a deep sadness in his eyes. Alexander's wife had passed away when Daniel was barely a toddler, and many whispered that her death was the root of the boy's silence. Alexander himself had buried his grief under endless work, board meetings, and financial empires, but when night fell, and he saw his son asleep in the vast, lonely nursery, the guilt crushed him. He had all the money in the world but couldn't buy the one thing he longed for, a chance to hear his son call him father. One evening, after a particularly difficult board meeting, Alexander sat in his study with a glass of whiskey, staring at an old photograph of his late wife holding baby Daniel. The boy's wide smile in the picture mocked him. Where had that laughter gone? What had he lost? A storm brewed inside him, and in a moment of frustration and longing, he declared to the small circle of staff around him, "Whoever makes my son speak, will marry me." The words dropped like a thunderclap. His household staff froze, the butlers exchanged shocked glances, and the maids whispered among themselves. Alexander didn't explain further, but deep inside, he wasn't simply offering marriage. He was desperate. He was a father aching for a miracle, and his wealth and power meant nothing if his boy remained trapped in silence. Daniel's silence had become the curse of the mansion. Tutors had tried, therapists had failed, speech specialists had walked in with confidence and left shaking their heads. Women from elite families had pretended interest, many secretly desiring Alexander's fortune more than his heart, and when faced with Daniel's silence, they quickly retreated. They all gave up. Among the staff was Emma, a young maid barely in her 20s, with no grand background or wealthy lineage. She had come to the mansion only a year earlier, hired quietly after being recommended by a friend of the head housekeeper. Her life before this had been simple, working at a diner, caring for her ailing mother, and trying to survive each month. When her mother passed, Emma needed work, and the mansion had become her refuge. She never sought attention, often blending into the background, with her simple uniforms and quiet kindness. But what no one noticed, until that fateful night, was the way Daniel's eyes sometimes followed her. Emma had never treated Daniel like he was broken. She greeted him softly each morning, left little drawings on his desk, sometimes hummed lullabies when cleaning his room. Unlike the expensive tutors who tried to force words out of him, Emma respected his silence, speaking to him as if he were just any other boy, never demanding a reply. The night after Alexander's shocking declaration, Emma lay awake in her small servants' quarters. She wasn't foolish, she knew the other maids would soon gossip and dream about becoming the millionaire's wife. But Emma's heart wasn't stirred by ambition. Instead, her thoughts lingered on Daniel. She remembered how he once left a flower on her cleaning cart, how his eyes softened when she smiled at him, and how sometimes he seemed like he wanted to say something but couldn't. She wondered if maybe, just maybe, what Daniel needed wasn't doctors or tutors, but love. The following morning, the mansion buzzed with unusual energy. Elegant women from high society began visiting under the pretense of casual calls. Word of Alexander's promise had spread faster than fire. They came with carefully rehearsed plans, games, toys, bribes, all hoping to coax words from Daniel. But the boy only shrank back, clinging to silence as though it were his shield. Alexander watched each attempt fail, his heart hardening with every disappointment. Then, one afternoon, Emma walked into the garden where Daniel was sitting alone by the fountain. She wasn't carrying toys or lessons. Instead, she carried a small jar of soap and a plastic ring she had kept from her childhood. She dipped it in the soapy water and blew. Bright bubbles floated into the air, catching the sunlight, shimmering like tiny rainbows. Daniel's eyes widened. For the first time in weeks, he smiled, not a full laugh, but a soft curl of his lips. Emma sat beside him without saying a word, letting the bubbles drift around them. She handed him the ring, and he dipped it clumsily, blowing a shaky bubble. When it popped, he giggled, quiet, almost inaudible, but a sound nonetheless. Alexander, who had been watching from the terrace, froze. It wasn't a spoken word, but it was a sound. His son had made a sound of joy. His chest tightened, his eyes burning with tears. He quickly blinked away. Could this young maid succeed where everyone else had failed? Over the days that followed, Emma spent more time with Daniel. She taught him little games, read him stories in the nursery, and never pressured him to speak. She told him stories about her mother, about her simple life, about the stars at night, and how they reminded her of hope. Slowly, Daniel began responding, not with words, but with gestures, nods, even little drawings he'd slip into her hands. The boy who had once been closed off was opening his world to her.